Author of The Way of the Wall Street Warrior, who spent 25 years of experience working in investment banking at Wall Street, including Goldman Sachs and now at Jefferies. In his book, he says he started as a proverbial janitor, but now he's a philanthropist. I'm misspelled. I'm totally screwing up that word. Uh, and serves on the executive board of management and technology program at the University of Pennsylvania and the trust advisory committee of Tau Beta Pi. And importantly, net proceeds from his book will go to charities, including other charities helping children with clefts. Let's welcome Dave.
Thanks, Shirley. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. So you wrote this book when we last spoke, kind of a bit of a how-to, but you told me it can also serve anyone who's not working in the financial industry. How is that?
That's right. So just maybe a little bit of background on the origin story, because I
Okay,
think
of
we
course.
all kind of like origin stories. So how this whole project came about was I was lucky enough to have gone to two of the top business schools in the world, and I've gone through lots of HR and leadership training in my now 30-year career. And one of the things that I realized was that in the firm that I used to work at, as you mentioned, on Wall Street, I was really one of the only people of color that reached the managing director and co-head level for many, many years at my firm. And much like most industries in America, there is a good amount of diversity and equity and inclusion being attempted at the junior level. But when you rise up the ranks and you go up the corporate ladder, you start to see a lot of that dissipate. And frankly, a lot of companies still have predominantly white males as the leaders of the company. And this is not just specific to Wall Street, although Wall Street does have a preponderance of that. Over 80% of the senior leaders on Wall Street tend to be white men. But even in technology, even in Silicon Valley, when you look at the websites of companies like Apple and Amazon, how many people of color do you see in their leadership team? Really none. And so one of the things that I started to do was I started to document and write down all the tactics that worked for me that I wanted to pass on to my two boys.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and I really wanted to share with them all the tips and tricks that worked for me that I didn't learn anywhere. And I wanted to be able to present it to them, perhaps at their graduation from college, and say, hey, here are a couple tips and tricks from your old man. Hopefully this will help you maximize your full potential and you won't be frustrated. Frankly, like a lot of people that have worked for me or I've seen and mentored throughout my career. So that's really how this whole project started. And then ultimately, I realized through feedback from a lot of my good friends that I could potentially help a lot more people by turning this into a book that anybody could buy, anybody could read. And as part of that exercise, I realized that a lot of the things that I could teach and a lot of things that I can instruct people don't necessarily have to just work in Wall Street. In fact, a lot of the tips and tricks that I highlight work in any highly compensated industry, any industry where there's a lot of money at stake, and therefore the stakes get higher, in many cases exponentially, as you go up the corporate ladder. And a lot of the rules of the game start to change such that you need to be very aware of what really drives promotion and elevation within various companies. And then as I was developing this content, I realized that a lot of the stuff that I was writing about is not just specific to corporate America. The things that I talk about apply if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to figure out how do I raise capital from investors, particularly if the investors are not necessarily the same ethnicity as me, or how do I make an impression if I work, say, in a nonprofit organization? I'm trying to figure out how do I build staying power within this organization? How do I build alliances within this organization? So the ultimate product ended up being something that can be applied in lots of different areas.
Well, I found your book had a lot of like some terminology that you kind of probably took off the streets, a little more understanding, and not a lot of this like formal like employment hiring type language. But you started off your book with the hiring process, or let's start off with the like writing the email or the application. You shared some of these tips and hints about, and you also shared about one example how someone came in during an interview without socks. So let's talk about that. Let's start. Let's lead to that.
Yeah, sure. So the you're referring to kind of part one of the book, okay?
Mhm.
And part one is really all about getting in the game, whether that be the corporate game or just the game of life. But how do you get in the game? And one of the things that I've always told people that have worked for me and people that I mentor is you need to think of yourself as a durable good. You need to think of yourself as someone or a person who has a lot of competition. And the reality is that there are very few jobs or roles in the world that when someone is determining whether or not to hire you or to give you capital,
Mhm.
that there aren't alternatives. And so I always counsel people around trying to make sure that they try to make themselves unique in some way. Try to make yourself unus, which is a Latin
Right.
term for being unique. There's a Marvel character called Eunice that lends from the same name, but the idea being that try to make something about you stick out, something about you seem special. Now, that can be your ethnicity, that can be your gender, but ultimately, I think where it comes down to is what unique skills or aspects of your background can serve that organization that you're either trying to raise money from or you're trying to get hired by.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes part of the goal is just to be memorable, just to be someone that people remember and go like, that guy or gal like kind of was like everybody else, but that person, didn't wear any socks. that person was kind of memorable because they stuck out in some manner.
Mhm.
And there's a story I talk about in the book
Right.
where there was an interview process and one of the candidates forgot to wear socks.
Mhm.
Um, and he certainly stuck out. He certainly is memorable. The only thing that he didn't do, which I would have probably done in hindsight, was try to use that to my advantage. Use that such that I didn't come across as someone who just forgot to wear their socks, but
Mhm.
someone that maybe forgot to wear their socks or wasn't able to wear their socks because they were doing something else,
Mhm.
something that ultimately helps in improving their candidacy
Mhm.
for the job. Um, but yeah, that's just a small example of trying to make sure that you stick out in some manner and uh, remove yourself from the commodity discussion where you're just viewed as a commodity. You're just viewed like everybody else.
Well, you mentioned play up the race, but do we really want to do that? I mean, because we don't always want to make it a race issue when we're trying to be hired. Like you said, we want to be hired because we feel that we may offer something to the company.
Absolutely. But I will say, I spent about a third of my life in Asia where I was the majority.
Mhm.
And I worked in the United States for two-thirds of my life where I was the minority. And I will tell you that what I have observed in both cultures is that it's not so much a race thing, but it's really more a majority minority thing. And what I have found is that the people that are in majority of power, they could be white men, they could be Chinese men, like they can be different ethnicities depending on what part of the world you live in, is that one of the huge advantages that you get if you were part of the majority is you get essentially the benefit of the doubt. And it's really no more complicated than the following, which is when you're a young person and you're working your way up the corporate ladder, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
Mhm.
But if you are the same gender and ethnicity as the majority, what I've found is that they tend to be more forgiving, frankly, because they see in you themselves.
I
They
see.
look at you and they go like, you know what? Yeah, Dave's kind of a screw up, but I was a screw up too. And
Mhm.
look how I turned out. I should turn out all right. So I'm pretty sure that with the right guidance, Dave will probably work out okay because he reminds me of me, right? And if you're not the same ethnicity, if you're a different race, you're a different gender, then that gap is much wider.
Correct.
Because let's face it, like if you are a white man, what do you really have in common with an Asian woman? Not a lot, right? If you are a white man, you have a lot more in common with a white man. So you're going to look at them a little differently. So I think that this notion of race and gender is so powerful and frankly is ingrained in a lot of people's biases
Mhm.
that you need to think through carefully how you frankly use it to your advantage and dispel the ones that frankly hurt you. And so my view is generally that what you want to try to do is you want to try to get in the game. You want to try to figure out how do I build some affinity with the majority such that I at least get in the game. And then
Mhm.
once I get in the game, then I can institute change from within. And so one of the things that I did was, even though I spent a third of my life in Asia, I didn't necessarily go out of my way to accentuate how different I was
Mhm.
from the white majority. And frankly, I didn't see any reason to. So as an example, even though it's small, cuisine is a big part of your culture, right? Um, I didn't go out of my way to like eat chicken feet and tripe in front of them,
Mhm.
right? Even though I love that stuff,
Uh-huh.
right? Because I didn't see any reason to. In fact, I wanted to make sure that they kind of viewed me as someone that they could trust, that they could view as part of the tribe.
Let's see.
And so I made sure that I didn't necessarily, uh, over accentuate elements of me that would strike them as more foreign than they have to be. I mean, I'm already foreign as it is because I don't have the same ethnicity as they do.
Well,
Uh,
once you got hired, let's say thinking back on one of your jobs, when did you start to realize I have to get into this game or realize that there is a game that you need to get into?
so I learned really young. I worked at Goldman Sachs when I was a junior in college, and uh, I realized a couple things. First off, I realized, hey, I can actually be pretty good at this, uh, and if you subscribe to some of the philosophies around like how do you optimize, the value you bring in the world, I think one of them has to be like you feel like you're pretty good at something or you could be good at something.
Mhm.
So first off, I saw, okay, I think I could be pretty good at this, this Wall Street thing, figuring out deals and the overall culture. And so that was how I first started thinking about the industry as something that I could try, at least coming out of college. But the second thing that had a huge impact on me was I was this really junior person at Goldman Sachs, and I was, the bottom of the bottom, and I would be at a variety of different meetings, and I would see how people interact and how they would work. And there was a group that I was part of, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, but I changed the names, and I'll tell you, obviously I'll tell you the story now, so you'll realize why I changed the names. But there was one person who was an Asian American. Uh, he was smarter than everybody else, worked harder than everybody else, but he never really beat his chest. He never, kind of took full credit for the work that he did. And a lot of times he was very demure to his boss. Then he had an equivalent, someone that was essentially the same level as him. He was a Caucasian guy who, if he worked more than, 20, 30 hours a week, that was a lot. This guy, came in the office late, he left early. And the rumor was that he was related to some partner in the firm.
Yeah.
And that's frankly how he's got his job. And then they both reported to a boss who also, if he did more than 20, 30 hours of work a week, I'd be shocked. But this guy had a magnetic personality. He was, I likened to him to like, he was like a Wall Street version of Jerry Seinfeld. Like you just love being around this guy. And he had this magnetic personality. He was able to get people organized and enthusiastic about whatever project was involved. And he had, the it factor. He knew how to, manage people and manipulate them like nothing I'd ever seen.
Mhm.
And so when I look at just these three examples of these three different people, I looked at that and it really dawned on me that, wow, you got this one guy, the Asian American guy, who works really hard, works harder than all these other guys put together, is super smart, but is not political and is not really advertising a lot of his capability. And frankly, he is treated somewhat disposably. And when I fast forward many years later, I couldn't help but look on LinkedIn to see what happened to him. He ultimately did become a managing director, but he had to do it at another firm. And it took him probably 10, 15 years longer than some of his contemporaries, certainly compared to the other guy that was kind of his peer who didn't do anything. So that was when, this 19-year-old me started to realize, wow, the world is not fair. Like, this idea of this being a meritocracy is a sham.
Right.
And this is and was one of the top firms on Wall Street. So this was not like some little firm that nobody ever heard of. This was like, at the time and even today viewed as the top firm, most progressive, most, DEI focused. And yet even there, I saw the game that one needed to play to get ahead.
So part of the game is really more about personality, persona. Like you said, being uh, open, engaging, able. It seems like the Asian guy you were describing, even though he worked twice as hard as these other two, he was pretty modest about his work and not really taking full credit, and probably hoping to just be recognized for what he's done. Like you said, he wasn't beating his chest, and maybe there are times when it's okay to beat your chest and toot your own horn, right?
Absolutely. So not only did I learn this empirically through my career, like I've seen this time and time again, but there's actually a ton of research around this, which is the following. Your personality actually doesn't matter that much at the junior level. Like it's more about like, what can you do? Like, how smart are you? How hard do you work? Right. But as you go up the corporate ladder and the stakes grow exponentially higher, the rules of engagement change such that your personality has a huge impact on whether or not you're going to get paid well, whether you're not going to, whether you're going to get promoted. And so as an example, and this is all, actually documented by Harvard, like Harvard's done a lot of research into this, is that for men in particular, as you go up the corporate ladder, there are really only a few traits that really matter that drive promotional ability and compensation. Uh, Certainly conscientiousness and the perception of intelligence are important. And I say perception, I say that, very clearly, right? It's
Well,
not,
you can play, you can pretend to be.
you can be perceived to be intelligent or intelligent enough for the job. Okay. But one trait that is kind of surprising to some people is your level of agreeableness. So the less agreeable you are as you go up the corporate ladder, the more you get compensated, the more chance that you get promoted. And frankly, when I think about it from a practical standpoint, I've seen this time and time in my career. Like the people that are willing to fight for themselves and not make everybody happy at their expense generally are the ones who are able to uh, grab more of the pie, get promoted a little faster. And the people that just sit there and just take it, they're the ones who get trodden over. So personality has a huge impact on whether or not you get promoted and whether or not you scale the corporate ladder. And I realized this, frankly, as I was going up the corporate ladder. I realized that, for instance, on Wall Street, not too dissimilar from Silicon Valley, frankly, there's actually an over-indexing of Asian Americans at the junior level. There's actually a lot of Asian Americans at the junior level, a much higher percentage than you see as a percentage of the U.S. population. But there's a much lower percentage at the senior level, and therefore, the way the math works is that there must be a much higher attrition rate among Asian Americans. And there's been articles published by Harvard Business Review that show that Asian Americans are the least likely to get promoted. And the numbers bear that out. And a big part of it is that I believe that a large part of the way Asian Americans are brought up and the way that we are taught actually works against us the higher we go up the ladder. And I'll give you one that really resonated with me
Mhm.
as a son of two Asian American parents, and I'm hoping it resonates with you too, which is the following. When we're growing up, our parents pound into us this notion that we have to be good at everything,
Right.
right? Like we've all heard the cliche story, like we come home and we got A's in everything, but we got a B in something, right? And what do our Asian parents say? Like, why the heck did you get a B in this, right? You got to work harder on that one, right? Yeah, I need all A's.
Right.
and we're kind of programmed from a very young age that that's what makes us, our parents happy. That's what makes us productive members of society. It's like you got to be good at everything, right? And we work really hard at that. And frankly, when you're a junior person, like that tends to be similar, you know, impression given to you by management. It's like you got to do a rotation and you got to try out all these different roles, and then you got to kind of make sure that you're good at all these different skills, right? And when you're a junior person, that's absolutely right, right? You want to make sure that you kind of experiment enough and you kind of figure out, well, what could I be good at? What am I bad at? And kind of fix those things. But as you start working up the corporate ladder, something interesting happens, which is that companies tend to reward not the people that are good at everything, but the people that are great at that one or two things that the company really values. And they're willing to accept that you can't be great or good at everything, and you need to make trade-offs.
Right.
And so the people that get promoted are the people that are great at something that drives the money machine or the ultimate mission of the company. And this is the reason why when you start looking up the corporate ladder, particularly if you're someone that has worked really hard to be good at everything your whole life, you see bosses, you see people above you, you go like, how is this person my boss? Like, I don't get it, right?
I've
I
heard some of
don't
that from my
understand.
friends.
Yeah. Like I don't understand how this guy can be my boss. Like he's a Nimrod in like, math, right? Or whatever the thing is, right? And I know you're laughing, but like I worked on Wall Street. There were partners of mine, senior bankers who were terrible at math. Okay. And you're probably thinking like, how
Yeah,
is that?
how did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. You're thinking like, how is that possible? And so you're thinking that. Think about the people that work for these senior bankers, right? They're thinking like, look, like my managing director can't even add. Like, how is this guy my boss? Like, I don't get it,
Mhm.
right? Or if you're in Silicon Valley, right, you're looking at your boss and that person is in charge of managing you, and they're like so socially awkward. And they're the person that when you go to a company party, you pray you don't get trapped in a corner with them, right? But they're your boss, right? So if you're working Silicon Valley, you see a lot of these guys, and most of them are guys, right? You see a lot of these guys, and you're like, how is this person my boss? I don't understand how this person can manage me. They can't even manage themselves, right? And the reason for both those scenarios is that they happen to be really good at the one or two things that the organization really values. So on Wall Street, most of the time, that person who may not be able to add, right, is a master salesman. That person can convince anybody to deed over their company to sell it to them and have the firm sell the securities or sell the company, and that's their superpower. And they've ridden that superpower all the way to the executive suite. In Silicon Valley, it's the same. If the guy or gal happens to be like a black belt in product or engineering, right? Who cares if they're a terrible manager? That doesn't matter. What matters is that they're amazing at seeing the future of product. They're seeing the future of how to build something, right? And so the fact that they're highly disagreeable and they're the kind of person that you don't really like doesn't matter as much. And so this is in my view a perfect example of why a lot of Asian Americans hit the bamboo ceiling. It's because they spend a lot of time trying to optimize so many different things, and time is a zero sum game. They don't have the time in the world to try to be great at everything, and they lose sight of what really matters to an organization as you're rising up the corporate ladder.
So they
And
really need to recognize on their own what their strengths are and focus on that area and not try to be just the employee or the student that's great at everything, because you want to be recognized, like you said, for that one or two things.
yeah, or you have to be really observant, right? You have to study your organization and figure out, if I want to stay in this organization and I want to rise a corporate ladder, what does it take in this organization to really win here? And the key to that, frankly, is to figure out like who are the people that know how to hack the corporate game.
Well, how long
And
does that usually take? Like Wall Street, it may take a little longer. If you work in another industry, how long does it take for someone who once got the job to figure out the game, or who are these people they need to connect with, or play this game with? The players, I guess.
yeah, I actually don't think it's very hard to figure it out, because in a lot of companies, I'd say the vast majority of companies, what you need to do is you just need to find and follow the yellow brick road of money. So what you need to figure out is, if you work at a company per se, where is the money machine of the company? How does the company make money? And then if you double click on that, who are the people that appear to have generated a lot of revenue or a lot of value to the company? And study those people. Figure out what is it about them that got to them to their role, right? Take them to coffee. Like ideally, you try to have one of these people be your mentor, be your Yoda or your Jedi master, right? But try to figure out, like, if these people are in the money machine, if they're in the slipstream of how the company generates revenue and value, how do I learn from that person and observe, like, what is it about that person that got them to where they're at?
Mhm.
And I think that's actually quite easy. The hard part is to figure out, how do I take myself from X to Y? how do I take myself from like where I am a good junior person working really hard and good at a lot of things to where this other person is who is great at what the company really desires, and fill that skill gap. And so for me, like I realized that pretty early on that if I continue to be really good at number crunching and fixing fonts and fixing typos and being like your good soldier, like I was on a one-way cliff off in middle management. I was done. And so I needed to figure out how could I turn myself into a master salesman, a master relationship person, which was what was valued within the investment banking community, which was valued among the senior people. And I would observe how other people did it. And so that's really the hard part. The hard part is how do I transition from this good worker bee to this master salesperson within an investment bank? And Silicon Valley, it may even be harder. Like if you're not a hardcore engineering or product person, how do I transition into being one of those leaders? And so I think that's really the hard part, trying to figure out how to do that.
Okay. So let's just, well, let's that sounds like, let's just go to the next step, which is someone who already had the job, has risen up somehow up the corporate ladder, figured out the game. Now you also spoke a little bit about, like, earning, potentially earning a lot of money, and what do you do with that money? And also, like, I forget what chapter, and I apologize. Like, you also kind of have to look back and look at your life and say there are times where you don't want to get burnt out doing all this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's life is all about a balance, right? And if you burn yourself out and you're really disillusioned, then what's the point of all of it,
Right.
right? Uh, I like to tell people about the Japanese Ikigai framework, which is really guided me. And the framework is actually quite simple, which is there are kind of four key questions you need to ask yourself if this is something that you really want to commit your life to, right? One is, are you passionate about it, right? And that tends to be a little bit of a cliche, but it's important, right? Like, well, are you passionate about it? Two, are you good at it, right? Because I think fundamentally we get more value both financially and mentally if we feel like we're good at something, right?
Those questions
Versus
be asked of themselves before they accept the job, though, you think?
I think these four questions are good to ask at every single stage of your life because they change over time, right?
Right.
So, are you passionate? Are you good at it? Does society value what you bring, right? And then, most importantly, if you want it to be something that is rewarding financially, is it something society will pay for, right? Because there's a lot of things that society won't pay for, right? And so I look at these four questions, this Ikigai framework, essentially like the four legs of a table. If you are lucky enough through the course of your career in life to find the intersection of those four, then you hold on as tight as you can, right? Because a lot of us don't, frankly. A lot of us maybe find, two of the four or three of the four, and it's somewhat unstable, right? Because maybe we're good at it, society values it, we get paid for it, but we don't really care that much about what we're doing, right? And if I'm really honest, that's kind of how my career started. My career started with I was really good at this finance thing. Society values it. Society's willing to pay a lot of money for it. But was I really that passionate about like, running numbers and spreadsheets and doing presentations? Not really, right? But I came from poverty and I had a lot of debt and I needed to make sure that I had food on the table. And so that propelled me in my 20s, right? But then as I got older and I started to have a family, like the passion thing really took over, and I started to think about, hey, there's other things I want to do in my life, right? I want to start a company. I want to spend more time with my kids. I want to pursue some of the creative side of me that lay dormant for like 30 years. And so I think asking yourself these different questions time and time again will help you maintain that North Star towards ultimately what you want to do. And if you are lucky enough to have found the intersection of those four things, then I don't actually think the number of hours you work really matters that much. Like, today, even though I'm effectively retired and I'm doing lots of different things, I probably work harder than I did when I was an investment banker, but it's
The
okay. Like, I
passion,
enjoy
right?
what I'm doing.
Right, because it's your passion now.
It's my passion, but it's also stuff that I think I'm pretty good at. There's ways that I'm getting rewarded for it because society values what I provide, and I'm talking about some of the things I do on the advisory side. But yeah, I think if you're lucky enough to find the intersection of those four things, then I really don't think the hours matter that much. Where I think the hours do matter and you do get burnt out is when you don't have like that intersection, particularly if the passion's not there.
Mhm.
Because if the passion's not there,
Right.
man, even 40 hours could feel like 120, right? You're like, I got to get out of this.
So let's talk about race. Let's just say someone is playing the game with person of color, and they're playing this game way too long and nothing's happening. So at one point, you might start to think, hey, I'm not getting hired because, the color of my skin. Like, how do you go on? How do you go on?
Well, I think there are a couple of things you can do. One is if you want to make a change for good and you've exhausted all options within the company, then I'm a big believer in you just break glass, right? You in many ways you have an obligation to the people that come after you to try to make the change, right? I will tell you though, most of the time I see that doesn't go anywhere. Most of the time the company goes like, you know what, you're a troublemaker. We'll figure out ways to besmirch your reputation and we'll get rid of you, right? That's why in general, I kind of look at it as a last resort. But frankly, a lot of people do that. Like some people get ruled by their emotions, and that's fine. And they go like, you know what? I don't give a rat's anymore, right? Like I want to take these guys down because they're a bunch of jerks. They're racist. They're misogynist, and I need to change the world. And I need to do this. And I applaud that. I just think that you need to be ready to have like a lot of broken glass, right? Because usually there's no way back from that. And rarely have I actually seen that work in the corporate environment. I think the better route is frankly just to pick up and leave, right? Like they're in indentured servitude, technically died, a long time ago, and I think that life's too short for you to just keep plugging away and feeling frustrated.
But we can't. How do we fix that? How do we fix that? Like, let's not want let's like we don't want this employee to leave. We want this person, let's say, to be move up the corporate ladder. I'm just saying, like, for myself, I don't want him to leave or her to leave. So but for them to leave, it means we continue to have this perpetual problem. We're
Right.
not fixing like this race problem. I'm leaving because I'm not being recognized, or they're racist and so on. But because they can always think, they'll just kind of eventually think, oh, they're gonna, we'll just wait it out because we know he or she's gonna leave.
Right. Yeah. So there's no good solutions out there, but there's one that I've been recommending, and I have not seen anybody do this.
Oh,
But I
let's
actually
hear it.
think,
Let's hear it. Maybe
yeah.
someone can try it.
So I think the best thing to do is actually some white collar version of unionization. I think that what should happen is like we should create like real ERGs, like employee resource groups.
Yes.
In my opinion, most of them are a sham. They're
Oh,
created by companies in order to give a semblance that
right.
they're answering to some ethnic group or some gender, and
Yes,
they
you
point
mentioned
to
that
it.
in your book. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
they
mentioned
point
it.
to it just like they point to DEI at the junior level, and they go, "Hey, look, we're taking care of it. It's all
Right.
good."
But we have
Right?
one colored person. We met diversity requirements, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? It's all BS, right? We all know that, right? I'll tell you, like, just to be a little segue, right? Like, so there are a lot of ERG groups that have actually invited me to talk, okay? And 9 times out of 10, someone within the legal department or HR department wants to have a call just like this ahead of time. Hey, so what are you going to talk about? Right? And I'm going to talk about the reality. I'm going to say, hey, look, I think most DEI programs are a sham. They're just meant for PR. You look at the data of some of the most progressive tech companies, finance companies in the world, the data is terrible, particularly as you go up the corporate ladder, right? So there's a lot of effort at the junior level. I kind of joke that it's kind of like there's a lot of effort to get a lot of people at the base of Mount Everest, like at base camp, right?
Mhm.
But there's no effort to help, different people of color and gender get to the top, right? You're kind of like on your own,
Mhm.
right? And so a lot of times I'm disinvited, frankly,
Oh,
because ERG groups don't want that
they don't
kind
want
of like
that.
subversive, viewpoint within their companies. And so going back to my idea, which again I haven't seen anybody really implement, but I actually think could work, which is some form of like a real ERG group that is essentially like a white collar union, and it could be broken out by ethnic groups. So for instance, let's say there's a Asian American ERG group or white collar, union. I keep using the word union because that's the thing that comes closest to my mind. which is like this organization pulls together and they hold management and the company accountable. And they say, look, I know that at the end of the day, again, I keep going back to Asian Americans. I know at the end of the day, there's a lot of us at the junior level, but like, there's not a lot of us at the senior level, right? So we want to have a full accounting on all of the senior roles that come up, right? All the roles, all the managerial roles, all the C-suite roles, all the VP, SVP roles, right? And we want full transparency on how those people are being evaluated, right? And all we ask for is a fair, equitable system, right? So you should be very transparent on like how you judge the various VPs, SVPs, C-level execs, right? And if you do not adhere to that, if you do not show us full transparency, and we don't feel that it's a fair and equitable system, then we're going to make it known that this is not a good place for Asian Americans to work.
I see.
And you know what's going to happen? Because frankly, a lot of Asian Americans do quite well at junior levels in a lot of these companies. Like these companies are going to be scared. They're going to like, we can't have that. We can't be known as the anti-Asian American company. That'd be a disaster for us, right? So that would be one way, in my view, that you could actually address this head on.
Someone needs to start that ERG though.
It has to be people within these companies that have a lot of power. It's got to be the other people of color or gender within those companies who feel secure enough that they can do this. And, since we're on this topic, Shirley, what I'll tell you is that I've been on so many panels and discussions about DEI and this issue. And what I find is that many people, good people, are still afraid about talking about this when they're still working for the man. They're still afraid of like saying stuff about how they really got ahead in that organization because they're really worried about like what potential backlash could come from their employer. Like if they made it known that, yeah, we don't really care that much about, senior leadership being really diverse, right? And so I think there's a lot of people that actually have the power to do this, but I'm not sure that they want to.
So how do we encourage them to? And then, to get this rolling and, so we can have more diversity and up the corporate ladder in the C-suite. How do we do that? I mean, I do hear companies that do have these programs where they help, promote women and people of color. I mean, have you researched and known what the success rate in some of these are?
No, I haven't. I mean, and I leave a lot of that research to the academics. I'm really more about like, give me some practical advice, like on how I can get ahead, right? And that's frankly why I wrote this book. Like, even though I studied at a lot of these universities and I've read all these management books, right? A lot of them are like high on theory and low on practice. Like, okay, yes, I understand that we have a diversity problem, and I understand that this is a challenge, and I understand there's bias, but what do I do? Like, tell me what I can do. And so that's where I've been focused. Really, it's all about empowering people, because the reality, my own view on Asian Americans is that I'm not sure that the cavalry is coming for us. I really don't. Like, I think that at the end of the day, there's plenty of other minority groups that have had a lot harder time due to like the history of this country. And we're just not a priority. I really don't think we are. And so my view is that the only people that are really going to help us are ourselves, right? And that's frankly why I wrote this book, to help, ethnic groups and people that are disadvantaged that may have the same disadvantage that I had. And then I do tell a lot of the people that I mentor, particularly Asian Americans, is look, you can hope for the best, but expect the worst. And therefore, you can hope that your company is looking out for you, but don't count on it. And therefore, you need to learn your own techniques and your own tactics to realize your full potential. Because if you're just hoping that the company's going to look out for you, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed, is my view.
Yeah, that's really disappointing to hear, because I kind of tend to agree with you. I mean, we all, like you said, we all hope for the best, that they are looking out for us, because we all want diversity in everywhere that we're working at in all types of industries. But it seems like we need to actually look out for ourselves, unfortunately, and just kind of get into this game however where we can. So, Dave, just before we end, you have any final words of advice that you may not have put in the book, or maybe you want to accentuate?
I mean, the one thing that I tell people that was actually told to me by a good friend who was a top venture capitalist is that he and I both agree that people aren't fundamentally bad. Okay, we do believe that people are fundamentally good, But you have to remember that people aren't necessarily out to get you, but they are out for themselves.
Mm,
And so you need to think about that really carefully as you are developing your career and trying to figure out, how do I advance my career by helping others? How do I advance my career by leveraging people's self-interest? And that's frankly what has helped me in my career. I've always thought about things like, how do I make my company more money? Because if the company makes more money, then I come along with it. How do I make my boss look better? Right?
right,
Because
right.
if my boss is someone that hopefully cares a little bit about me, if I make my boss better, then he or she will bring me along on their ride up.
Mhm.
Right? But this notion of being, uh, you know, open to the fact that people are fundamentally self-interested, and they're not necessarily going to help you specifically, but they're going to help themselves, all be things being equal, I think has really helped me in my career. And that's really the overall message of my book, which is like, try to figure out what incentives and what motivations drive your boss and the people around you, and then think about, what incentives do I need to build for the people around me to help me in my career.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave. And if you are interested in his book, The Way of the Wall Street Warrior, it's available on Amazon and anywhere else that you want to mention that it's at. And you said it was one of the top sellers. Is that right?
Yeah, so the book today, it got launched last week. It's already ranked the top number one, a hot new release by Amazon in the business finance section. So I'm very proud of that. It's available anywhere you can buy books today. And one thing I'll note is that I really did do this as a labor of love. And so not only did this book come about because it started off as a love letter to my two boys, but really to help anyone that feels underrepresented. But I've pledged 100% of the net proceeds of the book to charity. So hopefully it can help people, not only in their careers, but also help others that require some type of donation. So if you like the book, obviously would appreciate, a good review on Amazon. And by helping your career, you're also doing good.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dave. And the viewers out there, if you get a chance to get his book now, just also let us know how it worked for you in whatever industry that you're in. Thank you so much, Dave. And I'm Shirley Ng for Asian American News.
Thanks, Shirley.